Welcome to Swartz Shorts, the podcast all about the entrepreneurial ecosystem at Carnegie Mellon University and the larger Pittsburgh community.
Welcome back, everyone, to Swartz Shorts. On today's episode, we're lucky to be joined by Alex Baikovitz. Alex completed both his undergraduate and graduate's degrees at Carnegie Mellon University, and he is also the founder and CEO of Mach9 Robotics. Mach9 Robotics is building integrated hardware platforms and intelligent mapping software to make large-scale subsurface mapping faster, safer, and more accurate. They are building the cities of the future. Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So, Alex, before we kind of dive in, talk about all the Mach9 stuff, everything from, your recent raise to this Pittsburgh Bridge initiative, which is super exciting. As we always do here on Swartz Shorts, we kind of want to get an idea of your motivations, what happened before you became a founder of this business. So could you tell us a little bit about, what led to this moment in time?
For sure. So I was really brought into the robotics space by a really amazing CMU faculty member named Red Whitaker, and he's known for making some of the most amazing pioneering robots, like the robots to clean up 3 Mile Island, the first self-driving cars, and he really became a really amazing mentor for myself. And the first week of my freshman year, I walked into his office, and I was thrown into the world of nuclear robots in particular, and looked at this esoteric tunnel in a location called Hanford in Washington State. Spent an entire year looking at one particular tunnel. So the spring of my freshman year, I was giving a presentation to Red and discussed all the work that we were doing on physical simulation to robotics development. And on that very day, that tunnel collapsed. Wow. And the only person in the country that knew what was happening to some extent was some freshman at CMU that filed for a Freedom of Information Act to get information regarding that tunnel over the course of that year and actually building out those models. And what that was really reminiscent of is the idea that infrastructure is so critical and important. And really, it's important that someone or something is looking over it in the first place. So being able to monitor how surface and underground infrastructure changes over time really became emphasized as something that was important to me very early on. And fortunately, Red and other mentors and amazing advisors and coworkers within the Robotics Institute at CMU were just so fundamental in helping push forward technology in this space that is in dire need of innovation and evolution at the same time.
Alex, it's pretty amazing. I've known you for a couple years now. We've gotten to share some time over in the Swartz Center, and I think I've heard a lot of your stories about how you landed at this point in time, but I never knew that about your freshman year at Carnegie Mellon. Pretty interesting.
Wild story.
It's pretty crazy. I mean, what kind of timing? It's almost like Mach9 was written in the stars a little bit. But question for you. So from the point that tunnel collapsed, and you saw this and you were like filing for all of these patents, things of that nature, what kind of motivated you to go to that next step to say, hey, I'm going to now spend the rest of my undergrad degree diving into this area and then into my graduate degree?
Yeah, I guess it was just like the genuine excitement around working on technology that had a fundamental influence on people's decision-making power and making critical decisions. Like the day of that collapse, the way I found out about it was my phone was just ringing during a final exam that I had at the same exact time. And I didn't know what was happening to some extent, other than the fact that when I got out of that exam, I knew I had to go into a meeting to speak with a lot of really interesting, important people overall and provide some level of advice that like some freshman can just give to some extent. So it was a really surreal experience in that direction. But I think it was just a really interesting excitement about, you can go from an area where you don't have so much technical background and then really grow quite quickly and learn with the state of technology and continue to help push that forward. I think certainly in the world of robotics, we're really just in our infancy for the most part. We saw this huge first wave of companies that were self-driving coming out of these early DARPA challenges and the work that Red and others were doing in that space. And that was just so fundamental. We see, just here in Pittsburgh in our startup and really technology company ecosystem, Aurora to Argo to all of these other amazing companies pushing the bill and the envelope and building really $1 trillion industry around automotive and robotics combining themselves. And what we certainly see now is this second wave of robotics companies that are really solving problems that relate to taking that same technology and applying it to a variety of other problems. That's why we see amazing construction robots also being built here in Pittsburgh, to agriculture robots, to warehouse automation and warehouse logistics-based robotic systems. All things that we're seeing happen here in Pittsburgh to across the ecosystem, across the United States, and really across the world. And those components of things certainly are just incredibly inspiring to see a new wave of companies solve really pressing problems and today's most critical challenges at the same time.
Yeah. So, and you've touched on this a little bit. You've talked about this variety of industries that are now being permeated by robotics companies. Infrastructure seems like a pretty darn good one to pick up, especially given recent events and political and local pressure to improve our infrastructure. Tell us a little bit about how you've seen that evolve in the time since you have started Mach9, all of these current events, political issues, local events with the bridge collapse at Fern Hollow. How have you evolved Mach9 to respond to some of those changes and hot button issues?
For sure. Yeah, definitely. So we've been working on Mach9 for now about a year. And really, we were motivated by this idea of how can we prevent and predict and prevent infrastructure failures from happening in the first place, with a huge focus on underground infrastructure where we see continuous damage to underground utilities during excavation. In fact, like about every 6 minutes, according to some sources that we've read, there's a utility strike in the United States, meaning this is causing tremendous amounts of damages, disruption, and failures of resilience in whether it's telecom to electrical to gas related networks and infrastructure in particular. Certainly looking toward things like bridges more recently, we've been able to see a tremendous need for technology to help empower people like bridge inspectors, to civil engineers, to policymakers and decision makers to understand how to better exercise where capital should be allocated. How do we find need for, capital, especially with massive things like this infrastructure bill come out, that basically accounts for where it's undetermined to some extent. Like, how can we discover things that people didn't necessarily see, or maybe things that can't actually just be seen by a human in the first place? And that's where we really think that the role of robotics exists, is to see the unseen and be this superhuman that helps people make the best decisions possible at the end of the day. And definitely infrastructure being a place where, we see the need for technology to help others make those decisions in minutes and just not months.
Yeah, yeah. And so from a commercialization or a go-to-market perspective, this is fascinating technology. How do you then connect that technology to the decision makers that ultimately need this information to be able to inform infrastructure bills like Build Back Better, or even local, state, federal level infrastructure investment decisions?
For sure. It's definitely about building affordable and democratized data sets. People don't want to be able to fund a huge multi-billion-dollar investigation into all of the nation's infrastructure where, if you can make data accessible for some of this level of information to relevant stakeholders and policymakers, you can allocate additional information or additional funding to get the most critical forms of data to make those decisions much faster. And providing these really key insights around particular specific problems that already have some degree of attention. People already have to do this level of work. People need this level of information. And being able to provide people with the highest quality information at affordable price points is how this becomes not just a science fiction type approach. It's how it becomes an effective business that we can grow around the idea of providing insights to individuals that need them most.
Awesome.
I think one of the interesting things, and Alex, I'm sure you have kind of an interesting insight on this, is, this need is becoming very apparent in the U.S. right now. Like you were saying, Pat, we're talking about all of these, hot button topics within infrastructure. Do you think that when you were going to build Mach9, it was just kind of a coincidence that, the country was changing in this way and you decided you were going to start this company and these two things just kind of collided? Or did you start to really see this apparent need, maybe before other people did within the startup community, and you said, hey, there is a hardware solution to this. There is a, data analytics solution to this, and I'm going to be the first one there?
For sure. I think it was definitely driven by, not necessarily some of these big events. These have been things that have happened continuously. This is not the first time infrastructure has failed, and it's certainly not going to be the last, unfortunately. And it's our job and our responsibility to build out technology that helps people prevent accidents like this from happening in the first place. And that's always been the motivation and goal. Like the the challenge has always been there. The technology has not. And certainly now we see ourselves in a situation where we can build scalable solutions that help solve some of the world's most pressing challenges, especially in infrastructure, which generally we all assume is in good condition and is reliable and is trustworthy. Mm-hmm. However, when it's not, that's when it is the most bothersome thing to just generally you, myself, and everyone else around us. So certainly that's really been always a motivation in that direction. And some of this has really been grounded into the early days of Mach9, where we were talking about things underground and just like, why do we not know where everything is? And like, why is information and data so uncertain in some of these directions? And, why is it hard to get that information? And then that's definitely where the idea of internet technology being an area where we can innovate and push forward, an area where, traditionally there's a set in stone way of doing these types of things in the past. But obviously, as we look toward issues like the number of utility strikes, for instance, in the United States, that's not an adequate solution to really resolve a problem that causes billions of dollars in economic repercussions each year. So definitely that's where we find the kind of connection between the physical world and the virtual and digital world to really come into connection when it comes to infrastructure in particular.
I like how you talked about how we collectively take infrastructure for granted. Yeah. And especially here locally, talking about the Fern Hollow Bridge collapse. I can't tell you how many people I talked to that said, oh my gosh, I run across that bridge every day. I use the trail underneath that bridge every day. I never could have imagined.
For sure.
And it seems like the more events like this that continue to take place as our infrastructure degrades, the more this will start to burn into our collective psyche.
For sure. Definitely, Pittsburgh steel helped build America's infrastructure. And, a lot of that was 70, 80 years ago. And definitely now as we're looking toward infrastructure hitting its expected lifespan or its a dedicated service age in particular, it becomes more and more critical to determine, what is the status of a lot of these assets and what actually needs to be replaced and at what time scale, what time frame. Because obviously, previous inspection reports noted that Fern Hollow Bridge was in poor condition. But obviously what we did learn is that that's beyond not necessarily the truth. It was certainly structurally inadequate and needed to be shut down. And being able to provide traceability and information of that nature is a huge part of our mission, because being able to track how cities are evolving and changing over time is definitely a key component as to how we're going to be able to find an effective solution at the end of the day.
It's all good stuff, Alex, and I think Pat and I could probably ask you these questions for the next the rest of the day. But honestly, You've got a lot you've probably got to get back to. So I think we'll end the podcast here with a couple of questions that we ask all of our guests. First and foremost, you guys have a lot going on. You're trying to raise capital right now, hire folks, grow this business. Is there anything that ourselves, our audience, can do to support Mach9 in your mission?
For sure. So Mach9 is certainly growing. We're really excited about kind of building an amazing team here in Pittsburgh to be able to solve some of the world's most pressing challenges. So certainly whether that's finding relevant support within the civil infrastructure space to, just learn an extra edge on what people are thinking about in a professional world of this nature, to, being able to hire in product, business development, to engineering type roles, would love to find ways to kind of build our organization around amazing people. And that's really what it's about at the end of the day, and makes this a really fun time to be a founder of a company, is just like the people that you get to work with and the experiences that you get to create that way as well. So definitely enjoy, innovating in an area where we bring tons of different people together to really solve some really interesting challenges as well.
Awesome.
And I guess finally, hey, you got to tell us, with all this going on in your downtime, what are you watching? What are you reading? What's exciting to you right now?
For sure. So reading, I think Chris Voss with Never Split the Difference and Three Body Problem being an interesting sci-fi series or a science fiction series just overall. Definitely kind of hitting on, real world implementation as well as thinking a bit far out there at the same time. Yep. Definitely really great sets of like books for the most part. And then at least in terms of what I'm watching, For All Mankind, a great series kind of describing some really interesting spin on historical events and seeing what the world could have looked like in some strange circumstances and how people have were able to evolve and kind of take things in different directions. So definitely a really interesting series, and yeah, definitely some exciting stuff out there.
I love the combination of escapism and professional development, and also cannot recommend Never Split the Difference enough. That's a great.
Sure. It's a great book.
For
sure.
Great book. So Alex, thanks so much for coming on to chat with us today. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Alex.
Great being here.